قوامين لله شهداء بالقسط ولا تجرمنكم شنآن قوم على ألا تعدلوا اعدلوا وهو أقرب للتقوى واتقوا الله إن الله خبير بما تعملون آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Your second salawat for love of Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. And your loudest salawat for ta'jeel faraj sahib al-asr wa zaman. Before we begin the actual mawdu, the topic of discussion, inshallah across the next few nights, because these are opportunities for us to discuss many affairs, there are some points inshallah pertaining to the aspect of training our children in this country and in the West that are appropriate to mention, and we'll mention some of them on each of these nights inshallah as a discussion. One of the beautiful things in this community that I've noticed is the young men and the young children who are reciting Quran, and they're reciting beautifully. And the affiliation and the association of the Quran, especially for our next generation, is incredibly important. It can't be underplayed. From the one aspect, the Quran is one of those two weighty things that our Prophet left behind for us to stay attached to. And he said, if you stay attached to these two things, you will come back to me at Hawd Kawthar. So success in life is associated with both of these things. One is the aspect of the Ahlul Bayt that we gather here to talk about the Ahlul Bayt. And the other is the affiliation with the Quran. But when it comes to your children, the Quran becomes extra important. And let me explain why. Allah in the Quran describes and He says, وَنُنَزِّلُ مِنَ الْقُرْآنِ مَا هُوَ شِفَاءٌ وَرَحْمَةٌ لِلْمُؤْمِنِينَ وَلَا يَزِيدُ الظَّالِمِينَ إِلَّا خَسَارًا. Allah describes and He says that we have sent down in the Quran what is a shifa and rahmah for the mu'mineen. And for the disbelievers, it increases nothing for them except for their loss. Meaning that Allah has indicated that the Quran has within it a shifa, has something within it that is a protection, is a benefit, is a cure. You and I, when we send our children out into the world to deal with all the difficulties of the world, we can't watch them 24/7. We can't be with them everywhere they are. So what you do is you train your child how to deal with difficult situations when you're not there. One of the most important tools that you can give your child is this Quran to help assist them to make the right decision. This Quran is a light of the heart. This Quran is the one that guides to what is upright. This Quran is the one that teaches good from bad. When we spend the time and teach our children and associate and connect them with this Quran, it cleans their hearts so that if they find themselves in a difficulty, they can identify what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong, and make the right decision. That they won't be confused by the trials that are placed in front of them. But how we connect them to the Quran is also important. It's not just enough that we say, sit, read. How we connect them to the Quran is important. Our fourth Imam used to explain about the Hamilul Quran, that on the Day of Judgment that there will be three categories of those who are the carriers of the Quran, who are connected with the Quran and will receive the benefit of the Quran. The first level is that one who simply reads the Quran. And let's be very clear, reading the Quran in the Arabic language is fundamental, is important, is essential. What is in the Arabic is not in the English, is not in the Urdu, is not in any other language. Allah chose the Arabic language because it possesses a depth that cannot be translated. Which is why when you read a translation of the Quran, the author himself writes, this is an interpretation of the translation of the Quran. For example, Kalimatul Wilaya in the Arabic language has many meanings that are associated with it. When a translator chooses to translate, إِنَّمَا وَلِيُّكُمُ اللَّهُ وَالرَّسُولُهُ وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, his choice, he's choosing what one interpretation of the kalima wilaya he is translating for you, not all of it. Therefore, the Arabic becomes important. And one who reads the Arabic is the first level of Hamil al-Quran. The second is the one who reads and ponders over it. And the third is the one who reads, ponders over, and then applies in their life. We want our children to have all of these aspects. Therefore, we have to spend time with them. One of the easiest way to teach your children how to read Quran, read it with them. Read it with them. You want your child to memorize a surah? Memorize it with them. Do the work with them to show them that this isn't a childish action. Right now what happens is we tell our child to read the Quran and then we don't read the Quran. So it teaches the child in the back of their mind that this is for little kids to do, and when I grow up, then I don't have to do this. This is only for children. But when I'm involved in the process with my child, when I'm doing it with them, it adds value, it adds interest. It shows them that someone who I look up to reads this Quran, therefore I need to read this Quran. Do different ways of teaching them. But this affiliation with the Quran will pay off in your child's life, that as they grow up and they face challenges in life, they can identify what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's bad, on the basis of the fundamental that you've given them in their life. Now, this is why one of the important things, spend time, spend resources, and it's not just on the basics of the Quran. But listen, historically we came from places and times where learning the Arabic was difficult or impossible. It's not impossible now. What is our excuse going to be? That why don't we understand the Quran? We had the ability to learn. We chose not to. So it becomes very important to spend this time with the Quran and to teach our children about this Quran. Someone was recently discussing and saying, I think the most beneficial action is when an adult takes the time to memorize the Quran. Because there is no one that is pushing him to this action except for his love of Allah. A child, we push the child. We promote the child. We reward the child. We punish the child. Who punishes an adult? Who punishes a grown person who takes from his time to then go and dedicate himself to the love of Allah and the recitation of Quran and the memorization of Quran? The only incentive we as adults have for this is our own akhirah, is our own connection to Allah, and therefore it should not be something that we neglect. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In our continuing discussion around the connection between Imam Hussain and Imam Zaman, one of the important cornerstones of this relationship is the concept of justice. Adalat. This concept of justice is not simply significant in connecting between Imam Hussain and Imam Zaman. Rather, the concept of adalat is one of those fundamentals of this religion, that when you and I talk about the principles of faith, usul ad-din, one of those principles of faith is believing in the adalat of Allah, the justice of Allah. Allah Himself describes Himself with the concept of justice, and it becomes so important to understand this element of justice that it became one of our principles of faith. From amongst the attributes of Allah, we describe and we say there are over 99 attributes of Allah. There are 99 attributes. Asma al-Husna, 99. Why is this Asma al-Husna the one that we included in the aqaid and the aqidah of the madhab Ja'fari? One explanation, to put it briefly, is to say that this adalat is what differentiates us from other schools of thoughts. That other schools of thought do not believe that Allah has to be adil and just. They say that the justice of Allah competes with His being all-powerful. If He is all-powerful, then He does not necessarily have to be just, which is why sects within other schools of thought include the concept of what's called Maturidiyya, that Allah does whatever He desires. The fundamental of that school of thought is to say that Allah doesn't have to be just. He's not just. He doesn't have to be. Because He is all-powerful, He can do whatever He wants. He can take someone like Hitler and put him in heaven, and He can take someone like Mother Teresa and put her in hell. And that's Allah's right, because He's all-powerful. In Madhab Ja'fari, we went through the point and established as a fundamental that anyone who accepts the ideology of Ahlul Bayt has to believe in justice to the extent that he acknowledges and believes that Allah Himself is just. And that His justice is not a limitation of His power, but rather is a reflection of His knowledge. To explain, when we say Allah is Alim, Allah is all-knowing, Allah knows everything, then Allah knows what is good and what is bad. At that point in time, for Allah to know what is good and know what is bad and know what is right and know what is wrong, and then still do something that is injustice, is qabih. It's inappropriate. Therefore, Allah Himself describes Himself as just, and it becomes a cornerstone of our faith to believe in the justice of Allah. Then we have yaqeen that if I do my wajibat and I stay away from the muharramat, then I will attain salvation and I will be able to go to heaven. I do what Allah asked me to, and I know exactly what the consequence of that will be, and that I will receive a reward. Why? Because Allah is just. The same way that Allah talks about justice of Himself, and we need to know that Allah is just. The same is true when Allah describes humanity and society and explains that in society, justice is needed as well too. The verse that we began our discussion with, that comes from Surah Ma'idah, verse number 8. Allah says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, all those of you who keep faith, kunu qawwamina lillahi shuhada'a bil qist. All those of you who have faith, be always upright for Allah, bearers of witness with justice. And then he says, وَلَا تَجْرِمَنَّكُمْ شَنَآنُ قَوْمٍ عَلَىٰ أَلَّا تَعْدِلُوا. He then explains and he says, do not let the hatred of a people incite you not to act equitably. Act equitably. اعدلوا. Allah uses فعل الأمر to command humanity to act with justice. Then he says, وَهُوَ أَقْرَبُ لِلتَّقْوَى, and that is nearer to piety in what you are to achieve with your life. وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ, and have fear and piety of Allah. إِنَّ اللَّهَ خَبِيرٌ بِمَا تَعْمَلُونَ, and certainly Allah is all aware of what you do. Allah not only enjoins the attribute of justice on Himself, He enjoins the attribute of justice on humanity and society, and commands humanity and society to bring about justice. When we look at the message from Adam ila al-Khatam, every one of our Anbiya promoted this concept of justice and promoted the idea that justice is a requirement of faith. You will never find any prophet, any history that allows, promotes, encourages dhulm, oppression, injustice, abuse, inequity. It was never the practice of the people who have an identity of faith. When we look at this and see that Allah has not only Himself, but also to His people commanded the concept of justice, we know that whenever the religion of Allah is upright, justice will be maintained. Justice will be established. إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَعْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ وَإِيتَاءِ ذِي الْقُرْبَى وَيَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنْكَرِ وَالْبَغْيِ يَعِظُكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. Allah says, and He says in the Quran, and He teaches that certainly Allah has commanded you to perform justice before anything else. And then ihsan wa ita'i dhil qurba. Then to show kindness and do good deeds and to take care of your near relatives. But Allah commands these actions to insist that they have to be performed. وَيَنْهَى عَنِ الْفَحْشَاءِ وَالْمُنْكَرِ وَالْبَغْيِ. And He forbids you from performing indecency and evil and sedition in your communities. And Allah reminds you so that you take the warning. This significance of Allah talking about adalat and justice teaches us and tells us that this is the cornerstone of any society that is built on the concept of justice. Now, understanding that the message of Allah will always be based on justice. Now when we look at the message of Imam Hussain and the event of Karbala, we see that this is the greatest form of oppression and injustice that was done in the history of society. For example, the verse that we began our first discussion with a few nights ago, when we were talking about, and we said in there, وَمَنْ قُتِلَ مَظْلُومًا فَقَدْ جَعَلْنَا لِوَلِيهِ سُلْطَانًا. That the one who is killed with oppression, Allah has given an authority to his wali, his successor, his inheritor, to seek the justice. The message in the history of Imam Hussain is that there is no greater oppression that was done in history than what was done to Imam Hussain. And hence that oppression of Imam Hussain will be the flag that will be borne by our 12th Imam to establish and to change this world on the basis of justice for Imam Hussain. The oppression that happens against Imam Hussain is not an injustice that we talk about now. Rather, when we take a look in the Quran, the Anbiya reacted to the injustice and the oppression that was done against Imam Hussain. For example, when we talk about the history of Nabi Ibrahim, when he was ready to sacrifice Nabi Ismail, and Allah then says in the Quran, وَفَدَيْنَاهُ بِذِبْهٍ عَظِيمٍ. You guys awake or asleep? If you're asleep, we can move to the end right now. I have 20 minutes if you guys are with me. Everybody's good? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. وَفَدَيْنَاهُ بِذِبْحٍ عَظِيمٍ. That when Ismail is spared from the knife, Ibrahim complains to Allah. He says, "Oh Allah, I was ready to offer my sacrifice for you. I was ready to give that which I loved in your way." Jibreel comes and he says that while this has been put off from you, وَفَدَيْنَا, we ransomed him, بِذِبْحٍ عَظِيمٍ, by a great sacrifice. Jibreel explains to Ibrahim, the great sacrifice, O Ibrahim, is not your son, but the son of Rasulullah. Ibrahim complains and he says, "Ya Allah, I was ready." Jibreel asks, "O Ibrahim, who is more beloved in your eyes, your son or the son of Rasulullah?" He says, "Certainly the son of Rasulullah is more beloved in my eyes." Allah explains and he says, "Then from him I shall take the sacrifice. He shall face a greater sacrifice than this." When we look at the verses of Quran, Kaf, Ha, Ya, Ain, Sad, in the start of Surah Al-Maryam, these verses, this ayah of Haruf al-Muqatta'at pertains to the story of Zakaria, which is why you notice the story of Zakaria begins this chapter of Surah Maryam, in which it's narrated that one of the wasila that would be taught to the Anbiya, and not just, for example, Zakaria, but Ibrahim, Nuh, Adam, when he sought forgiveness from Allah, sought forgiveness by the wasila of the names of Ahlul Bayt. The first to do this was Adam. That when Adam goes and he seeks Allah's forgiveness and he says, "Ya Allah, bihaqqi Muhammad wa Ali wa Fatima wa Hassan wa Hussain." Jibreel comes and he asks, he says, "Oh Adam, where did you learn these names?" He says, "When Allah created me, I saw on the throne of Allah these names listed. And therefore I knew that from them is a powerful wasila for me." Zakaria was taught to take this wasila as well. When Zakaria would take this wasila, his dua and hajat would be answered. But at one point in time, Zakaria says, and he makes a statement, he makes a dua, he says, "Ya Allah, when I take the first four names, my heart is pleased. But when I take this final name, why is it that tears come to my eyes?" In reply to this request of Zakaria, Allah teaches him, Kaf, Ha, Ya, Ain, Sad. Kaf for Karbala, Ha for Halakat al-Hussain, Ya for Yazid al-Mal'un, who would be the one that attacks the Imam, Ain for the atash and the thirst of Hussein in that moment, and Sad for the patience and sabr that would be displayed by Hussein. Zakaria, hearing this, of this great oppression, cries and he says, "Ya Allah, will you take such a test from your beloved, your Habib, Rasulullah?" And then Zakaria makes a dua. He says, "Oh Allah, give me a son that I will love the way Rasulullah will love his son Hussein. And let me sacrifice my son for you in that way." Now read Surah Maryam and you'll see that the answer to that dua is where Allah is telling that we gave Zakaria a son who we named Yahya. And that the azamat of the shahadat of Yahya is second only to the shahadat of Imam Hussain. That we see similarities between the two, but the greatness of the shahadat is more azim in the hands of Imam Hussain. The oppression against Imam Hussain is greater than the oppression that was done against Yahya, but Yahya is second only to Imam Hussain. And it was on the basis of this dua that he made, and this request that he made, that if that oppression will happen to the son of Rasulullah, then give me one like him. So the oppression and the injustice that's described of what happens in Karbala was something that even the Anbiya knew of, and the Anbiya disliked this event as well too. There are many narrations in this story, but the oppression that happens there, we say, is the worst of oppressions, which is why Allah describes and He says that for that oppressed will I give the right of seeking vengeance to his wali, to the master of our time, صاحب العصر والزمان عجل الله تعالى فرجه الشريف. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. So we see that one of the responsibilities of our 12th Imam is seeking justice and the establishment of justice. So much so that the justice that is demanded for the killing of Imam Hussain is not just that those people and those supporters be brought to justice, but that the entire earth must be filled with justice, and that every aspect of oppression must be wiped out. Which is why we describe and say that our 12th Imam will be the one who يَمْلَعُ الْأَرْضَ عَدْلًا وَقِسْطًا كَمَا مُلِعَتْ ظُلْمًا وَجَوْرًا. That our Imam's job in establishing justice will be such a justice that wipes out all of the oppression and injustice that exists on this earth. And as this earth is filled with injustice and oppression, so will He fill it with justice and equity. When we describe and say that this earth is filled with oppression and injustice before the coming of the Imam, it's not just the injustice that exists between people. It's not just about the oppression and injustice that I can do to another person. This is one part of it. The description of Akhir zaman, this time that we are waiting in, is to describe and say that in this time there will only exist two people, imma zalim or mazloom. That you either will be an oppressor or you will be the oppressed. Many times we look at this world and we want to fight and stand up for our right and say that, someone has taken my right, I will stand against this. Understand something. There's only two positions left now. Either you are oppressed or you will be the oppressor. There's nothing else. Humanity will come to that conclusion that is only one of two stages. But not just humanity will be the one that's full of oppression. Rather, it goes further. Every existence of Allah that He has presented on this earth will be oppressed. The seas will be oppressed. The land will be oppressed. The skies will be oppressed. The animals will be oppressed. The fish will be oppressed. Are you realizing as you look at the world today and you see the condition of humanity and society today, that oppression, that pollution, that abuse, that extinction is going on now? That the extent of oppression is expanding beyond simply the relationship of humanity with each other, but to every element of society. And that it will be our Imam who will be the one who brings that call for justice and wipes out the injustice that exists. Now there's a couple of points with this. Are you guys with me? Everybody's okay? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. First point, is the Imam going to do it alone? No. Because if it was intended to be done by a miracle, it could have been done long ago. The justice that Allah wants is why He commands within the Quran, "I'dilu. Inna Allah ya'muru bil-'adl." That He commands humanity and society to come and submit to the command of justice, to follow justice, to be a people of justice. Therefore, it will be that the Imam's execution of justice will not be by a miracle, but rather that by humanity submitting to, wanting, desiring that justice, that they will follow and listen to the commands of the just. How many people exist on this earth? 8 million. 8 million. 8 million. La ilaha illallah. Got that off by a whole zero there. 3 zeros there, didn't I? 8 billion. These 8 billion people will not stand in animosity against the Imam. Rather, they will be in such a hunger for justice that they will voluntarily come and submit to the Imam. The description of the ends of times will be that every system of governance will have been tried, and every system of governance will have found to be corrupt and abusive and oppressive, and people will be searching for a government of justice. The justice that, for example, that people will be searching for, that is established by the Imam, they say that the government of the Imam will be such that every nation will have tried to create a government that is just, but will never be able to come up with what the Imam establishes as the government of justice. One of the questions that's often asked, we're going to tangent for a second. You guys are okay? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Why does the Imam have such a long life? Why? The discussion in this is very long about why and how we can prove why and how. But to put it simply, one of the explanations of the long life of the Imam is so that when he reappears, He will know the affairs of the people as one who lived among them. That every nation's history, every people's history, the Imam will know as someone who was living amongst them. That every nation will turn to him and say, you know us as if you are from amongst us. You know our affairs and our history better than anyone. You have lived through these experiences, and then they will follow and listen to the Imam, because they will say that no one can give us what you can give us because of what you know about our history. And how you teach us and guide us is better for our people than anyone. This concept of justice and the establishment of justice from the Imam, and that every nation will want to submit, and every nation will follow the concept of justice, is that they will be looking for justice. They will be hungry for justice. They will know what is right and what is wrong, and they will see the oppression in front of them, and hence they will turn to the leadership of the Imam of the time. Understanding this, what becomes our responsibility then? Right? أفضل أعمال أمتي انتظار الفرج. Our Holy Prophet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, if you've fallen asleep, I can finish now. If not, for the sake of Rasulullah, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Ahsantum. Thank you. Our Prophet would say that the best deed of my nation will be intidhar al-faraj, waiting for the relief to come. What does it mean to wait for the relief to come? Waiting for the relief, intidhar al-faraj, for the coming of this Imam, is the best of deeds that you can perform. But this is not a passive action that as long as I exist, I receive the reward. Similarly, there are actions and causes in Islam that are believed to be passive, but they're not passive. They have to be done actively. Like patience. When we say sabr, and to possess sabr, sabr is not that action that I lived through in experience, that I complained about in experience, that I suffered through the reality. For example, you see someone who goes through a difficulty. When they go through the difficulty, what do they do at the end? They complain to everyone. And there are other people who go through a difficulty, and what do? They come home and they take it out on their family. They take it out on their friends and their relatives. And they say, I had a bad day. Now you're going to have a bad day. This isn't sabr. This doesn't qualify as sabr. Simply existing through an experience doesn't qualify as patience. Patience is an active behavior where when I am exposed to a difficulty, my surroundings, my environment, the people around me are not negatively impacted by it. My behavior does not change for the worse. That this difficulty befell me and I put it out in another way, my behavior changed negatively in another way. This is not patience. There's no reward for this. As a matter of fact, it goes so far as to say that a person who goes through a difficulty, such an extreme difficulty that even losing a loved one, and as a consequence, they even simply strike their leg in frustration and anger, they have reduced from the thawab of the musibah that they went through. They have not practiced sabr correctly. Meaning that when Allah gives us certain actions to perform, they're not passive. We have to be active and conscious in them. The same way that sabr is not something passive. It is something active that I do. In that same respect, intidhar and awaiting is not something passive. It is something active. It's not just saying sit and wait. No, you people, you'll see my Imam will come and he'll fix all of you. No, it's preparing the people to follow the example of the Imam. It's introducing people to the message of justice. It's introducing people to prefer justice over self-interest. That when we see abuse and oppression, one of the reactions that society has is to say, well, that it didn't happen to me. It's not happening to me, then what do I care? To teach society that no, this is not an appropriate response, but rather that justice is something that needs to be established wherever we see oppression. You have to stand against it. The excuse that it's not affecting you is not sufficient. We have to be the people of justice in this time. And Allah is in His mercy has given us the motivation. that when you are the Shia of Ahlul Bayt, when you are the Shia of Hussain ibn Ali, when you are the Shia of Amir al-Mu'mineen, and you see in their histories and you recount their abuses and their oppressions that they suffered, that you, O Shia of Ahlul Bayt, should understand that if you found their oppression unbearable, then find every oppression unbearable. Change the world. This is the preparation for the Imam of getting people ready to appreciate and follow justice now. So that when the Imam comes and raises the flag for justice, for adalat, for equity, for good treatment, that the people don't come around and say, so what? It's not affecting me, what do I care? That people are ready and say that no, any oppression we stand against, and if this one stands against every oppression, we stand with him. This is our responsibility in the concept of intidhar, to motivate ourselves with the message of Karbala, to motivate ourselves with the masa'ib of Ahlul Bayt, and turn back to prepare the world for the Imam. This is not just for us. The message of the oppression of Imam Hussain, the absolute worst oppression, the significance of us possessing that message is that we should turn and use it to motivate us to bring justice in the world, to prepare for the Imam, to establish the justice of the world. Shall we go on one more tangent? You guys are okay? Running out of time. We got one more tangent. Are you guys okay? Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. There's a voice coming out of nowhere telling me 5 minutes. You want to be known as the Shia of the Imam. The Imam comes tomorrow, inshallah. Inshallah. He stands up. He says, Ayyuhan nas, i'dilu. Oh humanity, be just. And the world says, yes, we agree. We want to stand up and say, we were the true followers of the Imam, and we should be the leaders. Yes? We know about the Imam. We know who he is, we know what he does, we know his family, we follow him. Follow us. Imagine in that moment that all of humanity turns and says, you? No. We never saw justice from you. We never saw you stand up for the weak. We never saw you stand up for oppression. From what right do you claim that you are the Shia of this one who is the absolute justice? From what right do you claim you have any affiliation? You're all liars. Can you imagine that reality? That today our silence, today our staying away, that tomorrow when the Imam comes and humanity comes and submits to the justice of the Imam, establishes justice in the world, and we want to say, this is my Imam, that all of humanity turns and calls you a liar. Because we didn't see justice from you. You never stood up against oppression. You never stood up for the weak. Today, if we want to say we are the Shia of Ahlul Bayt, then recognize the call of the Ahlul Bayt that will be for all of humanity. Because the call of justice was established from Adam ila al-Khatam. Our command is to be just. If we're not practicing that command, tomorrow the Imam himself will say, you're not from me. You did not enact the teachings that we gave you. Standing up against oppression is our most important responsibility that we have. And every year we go through a class to renew and understand how bad is oppression and how much an Imam, how much my beloved sacrificed to stand against that oppression. The oppression that Imam stood against was not just oppression against him, but it was oppression against his whole family. When we talk about the oppression against the family of the Imam, there's one example of this oppression that is beyond compare, of the child who was killed through oppression. They describe and they say that the Imam had one daughter, a young daughter that he loved very much. And that in the days leading up to the event of Ashura, when the news of the shahadat of his cousin Muslim ibn Aqil reached him, Muslim ibn Aqil also possessed a daughter of a similar age to his own daughter. by the name of Hamida. When Muslim became Shaheed, Imam Hussain said, bring Hamida, the daughter of Muslim, who is the companion of my daughter Ruqayya, to me. When this child was brought, Imam took this Hamida and sat her in his lap, caressed her head with loving caresses, gave her earrings, and said to this child, Hamida, from today, we are your family, we are your father. Whatever your need and desire is, we will fulfill for you. We will take care of you as if we are your own father. They describe and say that the daughter of Imam Hussain, Ruqayya, sat and watched this event take place. And she came to the realization that when Hamida's father left, the responsible people are those who caress, love you, and show you kindness in that moment. Which is why on the day of Ashura, when Abu Abdullah bids his final farewells, this Ruqayya says, come Baba, rub my head the way you did rub the head of Hamida. That after Hamida, when her father was no more there to rub her head, to show her kindness, to caress her, to show her love, that you show me love that way, Baba, now that you are telling me you will not come back. The masa'ib of this child don't end there. When Abu Abdullah proceeded to the field and the battlefield, and the time for his shahadat came near, Sayyidah Zainab strengthened the women and said, O women of Ahlul Bayt, O women of Banu Hashim, O lovers of Ahlul Bayt, a difficult time is about to befall us. Our tents are about to be looted. I want all of you to take whatever wealth you have to protect your dignity. Give me all of your wealth now, and we will hand it over to them so that they don't disturb us. Sayyidah Zainab went through the entirety of the tents and collected all of the wealth until she came to this one small child. And she said, Ruqayya, you have some earrings that your Baba has given you. Give them to me. And the child begins to cry and say, no, auntie, these are from my father. I will not give them up. Sayyidah Zainab finds herself in a difficulty. Do I force the child now? Or how will I explain when they come to loot from us the possessions that we possess? Sayyidah Zainab says it's better not to make this child cry. So she does not take the earrings from that little girl. And shortly thereafter, the sound is heard, أَحْرَقُوا بُيُوتَ الظَّالِمِينَ, burn the houses of the oppressors. Imam Sajjad describes this moment. He says, in that moment, our children were lost in the field of Karbala, the way a tasbih that is broken and the beads scatter into a field. The children ran from one direction to another. Some were trampled, some were burned. But there's a description that says that someone came upon this small girl, saw these gold earrings in her ears, and yanked them from the ears of the child. They describe the child in response, turns and says, "Oh Sheikh, we are from a generous family. If you would have asked, I would have given them to you." But the oppression did not end there. They describe and say that this child was so abused and oppressed that eventually, when she could take no more, locked in a prison in the city of Sham, she sees her father in a dream who says, "My child, come back to me." And this child, Ruqayya, wakes up and she begins to cry and she says, "You have lied to me. You told me my father was on a journey. I have seen my father. He said I will see him today. Take me to Baba. I want to see my father." They said, "We did not know. How do we explain to the child that, oh my dear little girl, there is no way for us to take you to him?" They describe the mal'oon being oppressed, him being oppressed by the crying of this child. He said, "Give her what she asks for." A covered bowl was brought to the zindan, placed in front of this small child of Abu Abdullah. She said, "I did not ask you for food." Why did she assume it was food? Because they were kept so hungry that they did not have enough to eat except to stay alive. They said, "This is not food. Uncover the bowl, you will find what you desire." They describe and say this 3-year-old, 4-year-old girl uncovers the bowl, sees the head of her father. She cries out and she says, "Ah, Abata, who cut your veins? Who colored your beard red with your blood? Who made me an orphan in this young age? They describe and say the oppression, the dhulm. This child is a shaheed of oppression. They said the child took her father's head, kissed his lips to her lips, and crying she became unconscious. Comes her aunt, Ruqayya, wake up. Comes her brother, Ruqayya, wake up. Until eventually the mother cannot awaken the child. They say the child died from the abuse. Oh, the oppression of Aba Abdullah. It did not end in Karbala. But this young girl, we call her a shaheed of Karbala. Because one so young does not die in this condition unless that she is oppressed as her father was oppressed. ألا لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. Ya Allah, by the rights of these tears in our eyes, by the rights of the Masa'ib of Aba Abdullah, by right of that oppressed child who was killed in Sham by this oppression. ندعوك باسمك العظيم الأعظم الأعز الأجل الأكرم يا الله 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 يا محمود بحق محمد يا أعلى بحق علي يا فاطر السماوات بحق فاطمة يا محسن بحق الحسن يا قديم الأحسان بحق الحسين. Ya Allah, accept this small ibadat from us. Ya Allah, give the thawab of this majlis to our marhumin, the marhumin of tonight's sponsors, and all those mu'mineen who are in need of dua. Ya Allah, we have gathered here with hajat. By the right of the mention of Masa'ib of Aba Abdullah, fulfill our hajat. Ya Allah, there are those amongst our families, our communities, the khususan the brother who asked for dua tonight, who is in the hospital. Ya Allah, give shafa to those of us who are sick here and around the world. Ya Allah, give aman to the mu'mineen who are suffering through injustice and oppression. Ya Allah, hasten the reappearance of Sahibul Zaman. Make us and our families from the upright supporters of Sahibul Zaman. Entitle us to the ziyarat of Aba Abdullah in this world and the shafa of Aba Abdullah in the hereafter. Rahimallah man yakra surat